And we are rolling on June 7th, 2018, where it's a beautiful day in Los Angeles at UCLA. Sunshine is shining. Look at that beautiful campus we have. Do you see those beautiful plants out there as you walk from class to class? On your scooters? And today, we're going to be doing our individual / group reports, where we're going to be talking about what we really feel about the topic of climate change and global warming from the perspective of first the fact group, then the value group, then the policy group. So, without further ado, we'll first hear from Sydney Allen Wade.
So going into this class, after seeing the syllabus, I was kind of confused over exactly how I could debate climate change just because approaching the issue since I was younger. I always thought it was something you couldn't really debate anymore, that it was fact, that climate change was real. But then once seeing how we approached each subtopic of climate change, it made me understand that there are a lot of issues that deal with climate change that aren't to say that climate change isn't real, but to point out the flaws in scientific research and, obviously point out the flaws in other countries' opinions of climate change versus the U.S. Overall, I think if I was to look at the fact, policy, and value debate, I personally am really happy that I got to debate for a value debate, just because I think the topic of politics and science is something that's very, not necessarily controversial, but interesting because it is intertwined, and it has been, since science was really brought up into politics. In terms of my debate, I think going into it, I felt very strongly that politics and science should not be intertwined, though it's obviously going to happen whether we want to or not. Politics and science will always be intertwined. I went into it knowing that I don't desire the two being mixed. After leaving the debate though, and listening to my evidence and kind of formulating my thoughts on paper, I felt even more strongly leaving the debate that I don't believe politics and science do well when together. As we can see, there's a lot of political gridlock, and when it comes to climate change, Congress doesn't really make very much legislation in favor of climate change because there's a lot of interest groups involved concerning climate change and government regulations with the environment. But overall, I think this class clearly showed to me that there is a lot behind climate change that I never really considered. After watching the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth again in this class and being shown what fallacies can arise when actually having a detector of bullshit. But anyways, I think overall this class was definitely really interesting, and I think it was really cool to be able to argue against other people's values, since it's really hard to change people's values.
Thank you, Sydney Allen Wade. One quick comment before we go to the fact group and see Arun, also known as Varun. While it's true, our American Congress has been jet lagged and gridlocked and really in a mess, we've seen that our executives. Can we all say goodbye to Sydney? She has a doctor's appointment. Bye, Sydney. We love you. Don't change. Step forward. Why are you right at the back of the wall? You look like you.
Make sure it's good.
No. Back. Step right there. Yeah. Okay. While it's true the Congress has been gridlocked, we do know from our research that through executive orders primarily, the Obama administration has done a great deal in the area of climate change, in which President Trump quickly came along and through executive order undid many of the things that President Obama put into place. So if you live by executive order, you may die by executive order. But let's get to the fact group now, and Arun will first tell us about his observations. Can you give me 2-1 and then 2-1? Yeah. Thank you. Begin.
Now, it was just about 1 year ago, and I was sitting in an environmental law class. It was ever since about junior year of high school, I knew I wanted to do law. So I decided to wet my feet in the water, see what law was all about. And also, I was also interested in the environment, but to be frank, I had no clue about the environment. I had no clue about global warming. I've heard the words. I've seen the inconvenient truth, just like all of us have before this class. But when it comes down to the brass minutiae, we frankly did not know much about global warming and climate change. So one interesting part that this professor taught in her class was that she didn't only focus on the law aspects, but she also introduced the scientific aspects of climate change and of global warming, because you need to understand both in order to put them in accordance with each other. So she introduced us to a computer model one day, and it was a very early 2000s computer model. And to me, it was incomprehensible. How could a computer model that plugged in certain numbers predict 50 years from now what the climate could be? It seemed incomprehensible, impossible.
2 minutes.
But then, after seeing these 9 debates, and after doing a plethora of research, specifically in my topic of today's fact of whether computerized models can accurately predict climate in the future, I came to number 1, realizations, I came to a change in perception, and I came to an establishment of fact and fiction. But before I go into my 3 areas of analysis, why do I deserve your ears for the next 2 minutes? And the answer is simple, because even though technology is a very diverse kind of thing, technology is changing and benefiting us in all sorts of ways. It's benefiting public policy and benefiting our daily lives. So it's very important that you learn and acknowledge with the changes in technology and the capabilities. So now let's go into the realizations that came away from this debate. So the number 1 realization was that scientific certainty can never be 100%. No matter if it's the simplest model or the most complex model, it can never be 100%. Next, we can also look to the fact of a change in perception. Now, I came into this debate not really knowing much about computerized models. It was a very technical subject. But then after coming out of this debate, I came back to sort of my first realization, is that technology is not always 100% foolproof, and the veracity of technology can always be in question. And that's what the opposite side really put in my mind. But then lastly, what I found is fact and fiction. Now this really isn't particular to my debate that I talked about, but this is relevant to all debates with a fact, policy, and value that we debated. And I understood that it is in fact a fact that climate change is man-made to a certain extent. We don't know what that extent is, but climate change is man-made, period. And whether to that extent, that is what is up to debate. So at the end of the day, it is very important to be up to date, to be knowledgeable about current technologies that have possible beneficial impacts and possible beneficial positive externalities on our lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Varun. Very nice. Okay, next we'll have Daniela Liederman. Beautiful name. Where's your brief? Oh, good, thank you. Begin, ma'am.
Okay, my name is Danielle, and I would like to start off
Hi, Danielle.
hello, with a bold assertion. Even after having watched 9 debates, watched 2 full documentaries, and conducted my own research, I'm still relatively uncertain about the existence and the consequences of climate change. Now, this is a very important assertion for me, and I'll do my best to explain this in around 2.5 minutes. So, while I was writing the essay that was due today, I tried to think of that definitive sort of aha moment where I decided that I was a believer in climate change. And I couldn't think of one because I don't think I've ever really had one. I remember that all of my science professors have always believed in global warming. I recalled the value of my parents for environmental protection and sustainability, and I've always heard about the dangers of fossil fuels and the ozone layer depletion. But I don't think that I've ever had a real moment where I myself decided that I was a believer in climate change. It was more so of a thoughtless adoption of the opinions that were put forth by the authority leaders in my life. But yet I'm leaving this class with more uncertainty than I had when I walked into it. And while it sounds negative, it's actually positive. So rather than addressing each individual fact of each fact debate, I think that my purpose would be better served by sort of looking at the sources from where these facts came from. So as an illustrative example, I confidently cited the Intergovernmental Climate Change Panel within my first fact debate. I cited it as authoritative, objective, and accurate. And it wasn't until I watched everyone else's debate that I realized that I myself was completely inaccurate. A lot of the facts and reports put forth by the IPCC were manipulated to fit a certain agenda. So my learning process in this class wasn't necessarily deciding which facts were true or which ones were false, which ones I believed or didn't believe. It was more so coming to the realization that my own vetting process for credible sources needed a lot of work. So in summary, I entered this class as a very firm climate believer, and I'm leaving it with a lot more uncertainty and just a lot more questions related to the irrefutable evidence that fall under this blanket term of climate change. I think going through all of these debates, what I've learned is that deciding validity and accuracy on a case-by-case basis is a lot more effective than just going with thoughtless adoption. And as a concluding thought, my admission of my own uncertainty about climate change doesn't necessarily mean that we failed as a class or my research or learning was indecisive or pointless. What it points to is that I became a better critical thinker. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. I would highlight while the next speaker is coming forward that I very much like the point that someone admits that most of their conclusions came from the authorities in one's life that told them that it was so, and that I also like the comment that just because we have more doubt now doesn't mean we failed. En contraire. Okay. This is a good spot. It's a very good spot, and we may rock and roll. Just don't hold that page any higher because it'll block your beautiful face.
I did not memorize this. I'm going to let y'all know. Okay. So I did a fact debate on whether human activity.
Wait a minute, it's supposed to be Haley. What happened? Oh, she's the chair, right? Oh, sorry.
No.
No. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I was arguing on the opposition of whether human activity was primarily responsible for global warming. I found doing a fact debate on a certain side was a fact debate anyways is very difficult because like the definition of fact is a thing that is indisputable, like an indisputable case. So you really go in whether believing one side or not most of the time and feeling like it's really difficult to stay on one side that you just genuinely don't believe in, and that's where I was on the opposition. So my partner and I had to come up with a strategy to kind of manipulate the fact a little. So we tried to argue it in a way where we did not expel the blame from human activity altogether, but we introduced other possible ways that the globe could be warming at such alarming rates. This made me feel a little bit secure about arguing in a fact debate, but it still proved difficult, and I learned a lot also about the criterion on how people judge them, and how it's not just on whether you have credible sources that back you up. It's also on your performance, your confidence, the last remarks that you leave people lingering with and thinking about, and maybe if you just leave an impact, even if they don't fully believe in what you're saying and you don't fully believe what you're saying, that could really like sway them towards your side. Although I did fully agree with my opponent's stance, and I wish I was on their side, I voted for them the first day I walked in the door. The research stated their credibility was amazing, and everything I still felt was important to show how important it was to look into other factors of global warming and not stopping the research at human activity. This led me to looking at scientific differently as well, just because we have to understand that although yes, human activity is extensively damaging the planet, and I feel really strongly about this. Science is all about questioning and always inquiring and continuing research, and it's never really over. You never really prove things because it's the planet and nature and things change and you just can't really keep up. I do just want to leave with one thing, a piece of information, because it is really important to me that we do understand that our actions every day affect the planet. Don't want to come with statistics, but it is a statistic. The 2010 aggregate study, collection of scientific journals and essays, found that 97% of climate researchers publishing most actively in their field agree that human activity is primarily responsible for global climate change. The study also found that the expertise of researchers unconvinced of human-caused climate change is substantially low. That of researchers who agree that human activity is primarily responsible for climate change. So this whole this study was looking at different scientific journals. Do I have to keep going? Can I keep going?
No,
Why not?
because everyone gets 3 minutes and we have a lot to cover.
Basically, it's saying that the journals all match up. Everyone's research gears towards the same way, and there's a very low percent of journals that are on that human activity isn't the primary cause. So it's not saying that human activity isn't, but it's saying that a lot of scientists agree. So it's the little ones that do, they're just not credible.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much for that, Lonnie. So, Haley, you're a little out of order, but that's fine. Okay, good, I'm good. Okay, good. Haley, is that where you're going to stand? Okay, good, stand there. That's good. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So I used to compete in a debate format where you would get a list of resolutions and you would do a process called striking, where if you saw out of the 3 you were given, one that you didn't want to do, you would strike it. And then the other person would strike the other one, and the one that you're left with is the one you actually debate. And if I ever saw a fact debate, I would automatically strike it no matter what it was, because I hated fact debates. In my mind, I thought, why would I do a fact debate? What if I'm on the wrong side? But I think throughout this process and actually forcing myself to do a fact debate, I realized that it is a lot more subjective in that it, in this case with the computer model debate, it is very uncertain, and it's not necessarily what is a fact, but it's what is more likely, because we can't necessarily predict the future. I would also strike basically anything having to do with climate change, because I thought I'm not knowledgeable enough about this, so I don't want to go into this debate and not know what I'm talking about. So I think taking this class has helped me to understand a lot more about climate change. So in the future, maybe I will feel more comfortable debating about climate change. So specifically, my topic of computer models, I was really nervous about, and I really didn't want to do this debate because it's really complicated. It's hard to understand, and I personally thought I was on the wrong side of this debate because even just watching people come up here and talk in other debates, almost every person who talked about climate models would talk about how they were incorrect. So I thought we definitely had an uphill battle with that. But after doing the research, I think it really was anyone's game because we don't necessarily know. And I think it was strategic on our side to say, is it more or less likely? But I think the opposition side really did bring up some good points that I found pretty hard to refute. I'm still really uncertain about this, to be honest.
Good.
I'm not really sure, and I think only time will tell. I think it is a fact that computer models have gotten a lot better, but I don't know if they are, if they've gotten good enough to predict the future. So I thought that was a good point that Ricard and Pratik brought up, that even though the science has advanced, it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. So in all, I'm still uncertain, but I'm glad that I had to
research this more, because I probably never would have if I hadn't been forced to debate this topic. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your honesty. We'll give you a chance. You're the chair, right?
No, I'm
Who-
policy.
Oh, policy chair. Who's the chair of this group? Okay, good. Good. Okay, begin. Yeah, I think that Haley's comment about avoiding topics that you think are you can't deal with very well is a natural human tendency, but one that should be avoided. Now, Malek, that way a step, please. Yeah, rock and roll, please. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Malik.
Hi, Malek.
Hi. So before taking this class and before even looking at this topic, I was a strong believer of climate change. I always held it to be true 100%. I never questioned it. I was always surrounded by family and friends that acted as authority figures, like Danielle said, where climate change was something that was unquestionable, where there was a stigma around it that if you questioned climate change, you looked stupid, or you looked backwards, or you looked uneducated. And people that question climate change are not normally given any adherence or are seen as credible sources. And so when I took this, when I enrolled in this class and I knew that the topic was climate change, and after being assigned a fact debate, I thought, and I was part of the affirmative on the statement that extreme weather events are caused by human activity. And I thought that it would be an easy battle. I thought for sure we would win. I mean, I looked at the survey, and almost everyone believed that human activity led to an increase in extreme weather events. And I was surprised that we didn't win, because I looked at the survey and it said that everyone believed in this, and so I was surprised because the opposition was able to poke holes in my evidence and show that I was wrong, and that evidence that predicts extreme weather events in the future is very uncertain. It's based on climate models that are always changing, that are in a lab. It's not something that you can go outside and induce a hurricane. And so I learned that facts that should be held true, in my opinion, are ones that are recent, because scientific research is always developing. It's always coming up with new models, new scientific ideas, ways to test the climate change theories. And so that was something that was very important to me when I was looking through my research, that it was recent, that it was from a scientific journal or accredited scientific professors. And the ones that I never saw the facts that I deemed as false were those that were again outdated, because climate models have changed, or those that have been proven wrong. And so after my debate, the fact debate, I believe that climate change still exists and that it is induced by climate activity, but it has led to strong climatic events. But it is not as extreme as we make it out to be, nor as dangerous.
Thank you, Malik. Very nice. Next will be Nilu. Right there. Perfect. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Nilu, and the topic
Hi, Nilu.
that I debated was human activity is responsible for global warming. So initially, growing up, climate change / global warming was this big thing that everyone would always talk about. There was no controversy over it. It was real. But I didn't know much about it, and I was always skeptical. So I didn't know exactly what to believe, and they were always blaming human activity for it. So I just kind of looked at it like the whole millennial thing that we have now, where everyone blames millennials for everything that's going on. So when coming into this class, I was really hesitant because I don't know much about climate change, and having a fact debate and a fact brief, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be really hard. If I say the wrong fact, this is a controversial topic. How am I going to argue with facts if everyone thinks differently? So then, when coming in,
2 minutes.
thank you. I was for the affirmative, and I thought this was a great stance because it's easier to argue with the group instead of against them. So, as an affirmative, we had the responsibility of upkeeping the burden of proof to show that in fact, humans are evidently and factually responsible for this. While conducting our research, I wanted to pull facts that I thought were relevant and that would kind of shock the audience, just like Al Gore did in The Inconvenient Truth, as he talked about the polar bears and the ice caps, and the whole audience was like, oh, poor polar bears, you guys are dying. So I wanted to mimic that reaction and show that humans are responsible. But in the end, after the debate, I was still a bit hesitant on whether that was necessarily true, as other scientists and researchers are saying that the problem is not as bad as everyone says it is. We still have about 20 to 30 years before situations get really bad and before we can reverse everything. So ultimately, this class really taught me how to evaluate my facts and what facts would be more, like, are better to use as persuaded with the audience, and look at the audience analysis as opposed to just spewing off random facts that don't really matter and can be used as controversial. And that's it.
Thank you, Nilu. Yeah. Those polar bears are going to live in infamy, aren't they? Yes. Mm-hmm. Critique. Okay.
So I've combined two.
Oh, okay. The second one. Okay, good. Begin. Oh, wait a minute. Take a step back. Yeah. There we go. And a little step that way. Yeah. Good.
Okay, so before I begin my speech, I think two premises need to be set in order to consider what this class has taught me. First premise being that in today's world and today's society, rather, fake news is rather very rampant. So it's very easy to get caught up in something that might be actually true. And I mean, it's rather hard to discern what is true or what is false. So it's very important to really cross-check yourself and cross-check the facts that you're using to debate anything or discussing anything. And the second thing is climate change is such an issue that in today's liberal society, everyone does believe that climate change happens. So what happens as a result of that is that even within spaces such as colleges, it creates echo chambers and makes everyone believe a certain ideology or a certain fact. So what this class really allowed me to do is challenge those two things. Challenge myself as an individual who believes in that echo chamber, and at the same time, challenge myself to find out what news is actually true and what is false. So that's where my fact debate came into play about climate models and really talking about whether they are accurately able to predict climate events or not. My economics background overall led me to believe that models as a thing with equations and overall mathematical concepts are not necessarily accurate because they cannot predict what certain events might take place. So coming into this debate, I did have a certain biases. Having done additional research within that specifically to climatic events, it to a certain extent did confirm my bias about how climate models are rather uncertain and do have their irregularities. But having done this debate with my fellow peers and the affirmative as well, I did come to a conclusion whereby I'd not only changed my perception to a certain extent, but how they can be a little there can be a little bit of certainty, but also some models, as my affirmative stated about the Berkeley model, are in fact true and that they actually are able to predict climate events accurately. So having come into this class and done this debate, not only did I learn to challenge the fact that my conceptions to a certain extent were false, that that models can predict climate events to a certain extent, but at the same time, I was also able to get feedback from the debate that I presented. Given the fact that I went at a lightning pace for my fact debate, I was able to really understand how to modulate my speech and really get an understanding of what audience analysis really means. So at the end of the day, this class not only allowed me to challenge my own perceptions and my own perspectives, But at the same time, I think it really developed me as a speaker. And standing here today, I'm proud to say that not only at the end of the day, I do believe in climate change to a certain extent, but I've learned to challenge myself and challenge the conceptions that the society overall holds, and believe that there can be other perspectives that can be held and that can be legitimate at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Yes. Very thoughtful introduction, I thought. Yes, okay. Okay, is this Ricard? That way? This way? That way? Oh, you're, okay, sorry, this way?
Around, up and down, do the hokey pokey.
Yes. Okay, we be good, Ricard.
So I would like to talk about facts in general before I go into the nitty-gritty of this class and so on. I think most of us actually consider facts to be essential for our lives. I think most of us want facts, want societal decision and individual decision to be driven by facts. If you want more information on the importance of facts, the book given out by the Gates Foundation for this year's graduates is called Factfulness. So coming into this class, as everyone else has said, climate change, everyone was aware of it, but no one has really done the science. I think this, was true for me as well. There was a large belief in it, and I did 2 debates on the issue, one on extreme weather events, one on computer models, and there was a very different approach for me going into those 2. Especially extreme weather was something that's always been interesting to me. And I've heard for years, about the relationship between extreme weather and climate change. But computer models were something I was not as informed in, because to be honest, computer models are often pretty boring. So I did my research, as everyone else, and I came out with a few conclusions. Climate change is very real. Extreme weather is correlated with climate change. And computer models are not totally perfect. However, they are, as Haley pointed out in the debate, there are several models that are accurate and that we're able to use. And climate change isn't going to go away. The topic isn't going to go away. It's going to be in the media, so it's very important that we try and understand facts and figure out what is fact and what is not fact. So, going into the extreme weather debate, what I wanted to see was that there was a theoretical ground for why climate change would cause an increase in extreme weather. And I also wanted to see that there was, in fact, observations of it happening. That turns out that was actually the case. There are plenty of theoretical evidence for why climate change would cause more extreme weather. I think quite a few people in this classroom remember my nuclear bomb example. Point proven. And there was even more evidence on that. The National Climate Assessment in 2014 made certain predictions. Those predictions were then upholded in the leaked version of the 2018 report. When it came to computer models, going into the research, even though I was arguing against them, I kind of hoped they would be perfect. Because I think it's easier to want to believe in something that everyone else believes in, and that is climate change. That wasn't the case. We heard plenty of criticism against the IPCC, both from sources outside of the IPCC and from sources within the IPCC. But for every failed model within the IPCC, there are accurate models outside of it. So that was kind of refreshing to see. To end with, I would like to say, I mentioned the title of a book in the beginning. Do you all remember it? No, that is what facts is. We don't always pay attention to them, and even when we're supposed to pay attention to them, we don't remember them. Therefore, we must always, always update our facts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't have a brief. I misread the instructions in the syllabus.
What?
I don't have a brief. I misread the instructions in the syllabus, and I printed the briefs from the previous debates.
So you'll get one to me later?
Yeah.
Who are you're Tyler Cokie?
Yeah.
So you have no brief. So back up. Okay. Just come forward. No brief. Okay, good.
Okay, so the first thing I learned coming into this class is that facts are so easily accepted depending on the certain sphere you're in. And when we came to this class initially, views on climate change were immediately challenged on the first day. So I think what I learned from this class overall is that you have to be a really good listener just outside of your sphere in general. And you need to place yourself outside of your sphere to gain more perspective and also to argue your own perspective and better understand it in that way. So I didn't argue my perspective in my fact case. We argued that human activity is not responsible for global warming. And I thought we were doomed from the onset based on my own beliefs, but we got one vote. So it wasn't complete, we weren't completely screwed. And what I learned, how we got that one vote, is we got it based on establishing doubt. But I feel like we could have gotten more votes in our case if we had better set up our criteria, establishing a definition for responsibility and showing that responsibility doesn't necessarily entail that humans are the only cause. I was also attacked for a lot of other formatting issues, such as providing sources, and that really hurt my credibility. So I think, taken away from my debate, initially I work for Heal the Bay and I volunteer with Surfrider Foundation, which are two environmental conservation organizations. So I really feel like I did not have any agreement on my topic. But I think that if I can use the things that I learned through formatting and apply them to how I argue my perspective in the future, that I can really do a better job in my work and in my volunteering and convincing people of my perspective. So I do believe everything the government said is true. I still believe that everything the government said is true, but I feel like there are ways to argue the other side that can possibly, you can doubt it. And when you argue against people who don't believe in climate change, you can't just dismiss them for being in a different sphere. And you need to actually listen to what they're saying, and you need to critically analyze what they're saying, and you need to kind of deconstruct it and explain.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. I would also add you need to be conscious of the group they're in, because that was the original point that our good professor from Yale made the very first day of class was, they are really sensitive to what their group beliefs are, and they'll go with those first, so you gotta be sensitive to that. We're going to hear from, if it's all right with you, we're going to hear from Mr. Chen, and then you'll do cleanup and closing. Yeah. Closing, yeah. Thank you. Okay, Mr. William Chan. Shh. This isn't talk time, this is listen time.
Am I a good friend?
You are, sir. Take a step back. Forward. Good.
Hi, I'm William.
Hi, William.
Hello, Professor. So, before entering this class, I thought that environmental science, or more accurately, that climate science was pretty cut and dry. That if you didn't believe in global warming, you were a kook, and that was pretty much it. And I've come to realize that because of this class, I've started questioning everything. Particularly because of the things that we've been shown in all of these debates, I've started to look into things like the moon landing, the JFK assassination, and not to say that there's a lot of merit to a lot of these things, but I guess my point is that an important thing that we should do, especially as college students, is we should be questioning everything. Because if the people that are in a place specifically for education, if we aren't doing the questioning, then pretty much no one else is. And so when I was first assigned my debate topic, which was about climate change and whether or not it influences extreme climate events, I was really uncertain about whether or not I could even make a case of this. One, because this was a topic that I was not familiar with. I had never even heard of extreme weather events and climate change said in the same sentence. I had always just heard climate change is true, and if you don't believe in it, you're crazy. And so when I started doing the research, I did a quick Google searches, looked up hurricanes, climate change, and all that came up was yes, hurricanes are increasing because of climate change. And I was on like the 6th page of like Google, and I was like, yeah, there's nothing here. And so I realized that I had to not only change my research methodology, but I had to change like my mentality overall. And I think Haley mentioned it, but it's not necessarily whether or not facts are 100% true or false, it's what is more probable. And I've come to realize that on top of that, what's important about facts is also how you tell them and where they're coming from. And so that's why I kind of want to emphasize, like, yeah, questioning sources. Going back to sort of my binge on looking at conspiracy stuff, I was recently looking at Hillary email things and how she was getting grilled about how she wasn't, checking the sources of where she was getting all this information. And so that goes to show that, like, even at the highest levels of our government, if you don't question your sources, you are automatically less credible. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I got out of this class.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. I just want to say that I'm glad you're questioning everything because, in many classes you're taught to just take as authority what your professors put on the board and regurgitate it back to them. And I would encourage you to just, put a little crack in all that. The second point I make to William's point is I'm disappointed to hear that somebody was doing research through Google and not the deep internet that Mickey Garrell or whoever it was taught us. And thirdly, I want us always to remember this is not Dodd Hall, and yes, this is probabilistic, everything we say, right? One's a little more probable than the other, but there's no certainty in this game we're playing. Okay, thank you. And last but not least, to sum up the entire event and to give us a closing speech will be our illustrious Chair Serena Wang. You take a step forward or step over that way. Yeah, good. Very nice. Thank you. Perfect. Good.
Okay, hello, my name is Serena.
Hi, Serena.
So I remember there was an instance in community college where someone said to me, like, oh, do you know Trump? He doesn't believe in climate change. And I was like, what? Like, how do you not believe in it? Which is so ironic that we are now, as a whole class, debating about climate change because, like mentioned before, we often take this and we immediately assume it to be a fact without doing prior research or even investigating deeper into what is given to us. So with this topic, my group received the one about hurricanes and other extreme climate events being consequences of global warming. So before this debate, I immediately believed it to be factual. I've always heard this resolution presented as a fact, and I have never heard any counter argument on the other side of this resolution. So as a result, I had a preconceived notion that this was already factual. However, after the debate, I think my viewpoints have changed, and I'm able to see that this resolution shouldn't always be regarded as a fact. It's not saying that this statement is false or inaccurate, but we can't immediately just deem things to be facts. If we look deeper and if we find, like how we found research about the IPCC, we can see that there is a lot of room for doubt. We need to question our models that we are using, the sources that we are citing, and the statistics that we are giving when we are giving these debates. And so as a result, since there was so much room for error and doubt, it wouldn't be fair to immediately regard the resolution that I was given as a fact. And I think this can easily be applied to any single debate topic that is given in regards to climate change. There is so much uncertainty going on. One thing I did want to mention is that, as you all might know, that I was the fact leader in charge of this group, and before going in, I was scared and nervous because the other leaders were all debaters and I knew nothing about global warming. But I think that this just goes to show that going into a topic that you don't know anything about is challenging in a good way, and it showed me that global warming isn't as impossible or difficult of a topic as I previously believed. So I think to summarize my own part, I think that this topic has encouraged me to dig deeper into other controversial topics that are difficult to understand, especially scientific ones, which are probably topics that we often avoid. As for the group as a whole, when it comes to fact debate, I wrote down some notes, and I think some takeaways that we have all learned as a group is that there is a stigma to not question climate change, that scientific and technology cannot always be 100% certain. Some things that we heard repetitively was that it is important to be up on date and to get facts, to check and make sure that your facts are always up to date, that there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to climate change, and there are a lot of fake news, meaning that we need to fact check all the sources that we are given. Overall, when it comes to debates being presented in a fact, not like value or policy, but for fact, what doesn't matter is whether or not it is a fact, but what is more likely. And finally, I think as a group we were all able to walk away with the idea that we easily accept facts and we take them as face value instead of digging deeper. So I think overall the fact group as a whole was challenged to really think about what they're taking in and what they're saying instead of just taking everything to be a fact.
Great, thank you. Let me add, Serena, that the feedback I got from your members was you did a really excellent job as a chair, and that you, even though you weren't a, quote, master debater or a cunning linguist as the other two were, you did a good job, okay? So thank you. Okay, it's now time for values. And that would line the wall, please, with Brett, Brittany, Carolina, Cole, Derek, Jennifer, Lean, Malik, Natalie, Pratik, Sydney, Su Ying, and Arun. No, not Arun. She's policy. That's a value. We do fact, value, then policy. Who has my stapler? Anybody have my stapler? You have my stapler? It's on the podium? Of course not. Could you, just to save time, collect them from all in order and then just have them from top, yours on the top and on bottom, blah, 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 so they're right in order and ready to go. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Ooh, boy. You're different height.
So step back?
No. It's, a little bit more. Still missing your head. There we go. Okay. Half step that way. Yeah. Okay, wait, just one minute. A little dark. Okay. And we are now rolling and going into a different phase of our consideration. We've had some talk about the facts. What are the facts? We've had a nice summary from our leader. We had a nice observation from Pratik about this world we live in now of fake facts, where we really need to be on our toes to do a lot of fact checking. But now we're moving into the value realm, and to open our discussion is Brett N.
I am Brett.
Hi, Brett.
Before taking this class, I didn't really know much about climate change. I didn't really care much about it. It's not that I didn't think it was an issue, it's just that I had like more important things to do and more important issues to deal with. Like, I live in a lot of poor neighborhoods, and I've never heard anyone talk about climate change ever. People are more concerned about getting shot by cops or like starving. And so like in this neighborhood, like when someone like would come up to me and say like, you know, want to raise awareness about climate change or get money or something, I would like kind of think to myself like, this is the thing that you want to like put your energy and focus on. Like out of all the things you could be doing that are like currently facing like people today, this is what you choose. And it just kind of like annoyed me. And so I didn't know that climate change was the topic of this class. If I did, I probably wouldn't have taken it just because I would assume that it was just going to be like people pushing it down my throat. But I was glad to find out that it was more of actually debating which one was which, or like what was true and what wasn't. I live my life by like 2 quotes, one of them being, I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. And so I'm always open to, I play devil's advocate with myself about everything I believe, no matter how strongly I believe it, always. And same thing with anyone else's opinion, no matter if they have like credentials from Harvard or the homeless down the street, doesn't matter. So when I started doing my debate about politicization of science being undesirable, I went with an open mind. I knew I didn't trust politicians, so that was like my starting point, but I just like kind of like took that out of my mind and just went at it clean. And so whenever I make a decision, I looked at the worst possible consequences and the best possible benefits, and then I go to the more relevant stuff. So initially when I found eugenics, I was like, you said 1 minute?
Yeah, it's a 3-minute speech,
When I found
Brett,
eugenics,
sorry.
I was thinking that, you know, there's no way that if anything could be, any benefits to outweigh those consequences. So I was like, oh, that's pretty damning evidence. I looked at benefits and I was like, even if it like cured cancer or something, even if politicians or science led to like funding research that like cured cancer, it still wouldn't be worth it to me because like saving lives isn't more beneficial than like torture of lives. I know there are way worse things for personal experience that are worse than death. So saving lives doesn't outweigh destruction of lives and torture. Then I looked at like, okay, overall, I'd say that my values are still the same. I think climate change is probably real, probably man-made, insignificant to me. And one thing that is like almost beautiful about it is that it doesn't discriminate, it doesn't target a group of people, so it's not prejudicial. So at least if it happens, it would just hit everyone the same.
Thank you, Brett. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
The point is that it won't hit everyone the same. Fully developed get way harder.
Okay, let's have the debate later. You're getting the power stance, feet wider than your shoulders. Yeah, that's right. Come forward. Yeah, good. Shh. Quiet, please. Stand that way a little bit.
I can't say I agree.
Okay, you two can go outside and argue. Thank you. Could you put your feet wider than your shoulders and stand that way? That's called the power stance.
Not feeling the power. Okay.
Not feeling the power. Well, feeling. Are you Jennifer Kim?
Wait, who's that?
I'm supposed to have a brief that I follow with your name on it. You're supposed to hand me before you speak.
Oh,
Are
okay.
you Brittany?
Yeah.
So I should have a brief that says Brittany on it. Okay, now I do. And then I should have one that says Giovanni. I don't. Something's really wrong with this setup. Could you
that's
clarify
me.
all
No,
this, please? Oh my God. All right, good. All right. So Brittany, do it.
I was gonna come in here and be, well, I worked on the debate because I felt really I had performance anxiety to say the least. I didn't really know about climate change when I came in, but after hearing everybody speak, it made me feel a lot better that a lot of people felt the way that I did about it and that they didn't know about it. And for me, what ruined my debate was overthinking, and that's a problem. And Looking back over the research that I did about the topic, I found a point that really resonated with me, and I'm a little opposite from Brett. I'm like, I don't know if I'm naive, but I always like to believe the good in things, and so I don't think that science is never political. I think that everything's political in life, no matter where you go, what you do. And if it's an important issue, there's always going to be a big corporation involved, or there's always going to be a big weight, or somebody powerful, or there's always going to be a hidden agenda. That's life, and I think that there's ways to work around it. And so for me, when I was thinking about how I felt about the issue of whether politicization is desirable, I thought that scientists having an opinion in policymaking would be the best thing for policymakers because they don't have all the opinion. I think that there's no voice in the scientific community because nobody hears about scientists. I don't know what scientists are doing, except like Elon Musk. I don't think he's a scientist though, so I can't really reference that. But we don't know. The only way we do know is when it's spread through technology, and from the articles I was reading, scientists can't communicate as well as maybe we can, just different kind of lingo. And so I think that through a politician or through an actor or whoever can advocate a policy, it doesn't matter who it is, as long as the information is correct. And I think that if the scientific processes, doing scientific methodology where you're retesting hypothesis, then it is verified to be a credible source. And
1 minute.
if that's enough of that, I can't talk about science anymore. I think that if I knew the topics, I would have been a little bit more hesitant. But I think that it's good to challenge yourself. I definitely have been thinking on a more scientific basis lately, really revolving my life around that. And I feel that it challenged me to kind of speak up and to face anxiety about talking in public. And so, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Brittany. And now I'll need to have Carolina's brief in front of me, and I do, praise the Lord. Good. Things are working out better now. Ooh, but not for you. Go over that way. And come up this way. A little bit more. Yeah, back a little bit. Ooh, perfect. Nice. Thank you. Yeah.
So when I studied in this class, I thought we were just going to get a thing that we kind of liked, in debate, and that's it. But I didn't understand. I never debated before, and I didn't understand how we had fact and policy and value. And when I went to the value team, I was kind of like, what do I do in a value debate? I have no idea. And I started to analyze what are my values, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from at least my debate, what I believe in, and how I translate this to not just persuade people, but also understand their values and why they do things. So my topic was if global warming is catastrophic on balance, and for me it was a big yes. Like, I grew up in Brazil, and we always learned that we need to be environmentally aware of everything and sustainable, and the Amazon, and everyone is dying, and Native Indians are dying, and it's like, you cannot, you need to help everyone. And I think I stopped to analyze why we actually do these things and why people also want to help. And the first thing I analyzed in my debate was actually what is catastrophic. If it's the world is on fire, or if it's just like something little of, one person died or something happened. And I think that's really subjective how people see it. And the second thing was, what I valued the most and how I do things in my daily life, or my goals and what I think according to what I believe in. And researching this topic and everything, you see a lot of politicians and actors and actresses saying, oh yes, I help Greenpeace and make money and everything, and why they do it. Do they actually care? What are their values? And why am I defending this? And I realized that actually a lot of people just do it to be seen. So, I donate millions of money, and I just want society to see that, and to say that, I'm here and I help the world and I'm a good person, instead of just saying, you know what, I'm uncertain, or I don't actually care, or I don't know, I don't even know what climate change is, or something like that. So yeah, it was a very nice class, and I think I learned a lot also about myself and my values.
Good. Thank you, Carolina. That will bring us to Cole. Cole needs to step that way a bit. Step back. And then over. Then up. Yeah, oh, perfect, perfect. Yeah, bring him. Okay, thank you.
Can I start whenever?
You're good. Yeah.
Alright, cool. My name's Cole, and
Hi, Cole.
for my report, I wanted to focus on my debate in particular and more of a reflection, because I feel like with limited amount of time, that's the best way to do it. So for my value debate, I was in charge of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that environmental concerns are more important than economic growth. Going into this, I had the mindset of, wow, this is actually going to be pretty hard to convince people because you need money to address these problems. But I was able to find, so my goal was to find a bunch of environmental concerns and show how important these problems can be. So through my research of academic sources, I was able to find some examples such as the negative effects on crop production, mass extinction, and the increase in premature death due to air pollution. I was very surprised actually on how catastrophic some of these events really are. Ultimately though, the audience had sided with the opposition, which aligned with my personal beliefs. And I mean, I do believe climate change has definitely negative effects on our planet, as well as the animals and the humans. But I am actually hesitant a little bit on how much we attribute to climate change, as well as what we can do to reverse or reduce it. Ultimately, I still hold the values that environmental concerns are important, but I think we need to prioritize economic growth in order to address these concerns. So an overview of the debate, this was my first debate. I didn't really have any prior experience or knowledge. And I thought the hardest part to me was definitely thinking on the fly, like, and the organization and refutations, because they were brand new to me. I had watched prior debates on YouTube just to get an idea, but when I actually had to do it, it was way harder than I anticipated. Having to think of cross-examination questions and refutations when the opposition's talking, and then you're trying to write down one point, and they say another one, you're trying to think about that one to cross-examine, that was very difficult, and I was extremely unfamiliar with this. Things I thought I did well in the debate were, I thought I had a pretty good delivery of my speech, and I thought my evidence was backed up by credible sources, as I'm sure I mentioned about the Harvard and NASA, and I was throwing all the big names out. So I thought I did that well, but I did think I made enough mistakes to make us lose the debate. In hindsight, I thought one of the biggest problems was I didn't link the economic growth to the environmental concerns. And because of that, I lost a lot of credibility because all I was doing was addressing the environmental concerns, and I didn't try to link them and show, hey, this is why the environmental concerns are more important than the economic growth. And then secondly was my closing remarks. I had spent, since I was the second speaker, I had thought I had 7 minutes to refute. I had done the 4-step format probably 8 times in my brief. And to me, I thought my last 2 minutes was supposed to be just doing the claims. So when I had found out that I had to do refutations again, I was on the spot, and it severely weakened my case. So ultimately, my priorities remain the same. I still think we need economic growth before we can address environmental concerns. And I thought this class was a really great job to practice public speaking and a really good life lesson, because I do want to go to law school, so debates are very important. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole Martinez. Yeah. It's nice to hear the mention of the values, and I think that I appreciate you noticing that you needed to link the two. You know, it wasn't just to talk about one and hope the audience linked it for you. You know, details, huh? Okay, that will bring us to,
Now Jennifer.
Derek Taylor.
Oh, he's not here.
Oh, Derek Taylor, okay, we lost Derek, okay. Jennifer Kim, yes, hello Jennifer. Back to step. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so hi, I'm Jennifer Kim.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. And I debated as the opposition in the second value debate. Climate change on balance is catastrophic. I was lucky that I got to debate on the side that I believed in, and to be completely honest, I was a bit biased listening through all the debates. I always thought that the climate change was something that was happening, because I grew up listening adults blaming on climate change for temperature increase and the whole world is going to end deal. Not because I come from science background. You guys think that coming from science background, like we will know everything about everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah,
but
right.
we don't, I mean, I didn't know anything about the climate change because I was not really specializing in that specific topic.
Yeah.
However, ever since I was a kid, I never thought I would be greatly impacted by the climate change, nor ever will be. So after researching, debating, and listening through all the debates, my beliefs of climate change solidified. So I still believe that climate change is happening, but not to the extent that we can call it as a catastrophe. When I think about a catastrophe, I immediately think about some like natural disasters like avalanches or tornadoes. And those events cause great harm in very short amount of time. However, I believe that climate change is different from those natural disasters because climate change actually does change gradually over a long period of time. As I argued in my debate, there are small gradual changes over a long period of time, and I wanted to note one of the sources. I believe it was from James Hansen. The graph showed a change in 1 Celsius degree increase from the first decade of the 20th century to the first decade of the 21st century. And this was computed from the past temperature fluctuations and clearly shows that it's a steady increase rather than a sharp peak. And I thought this graph was a great representation of showing that climate change is just not a sudden change, but just a gradual fluctuations. At the end, climate change is definitely present and is affected by greenhouse effects that are caused by greenhouse gas emissions, may be impacted by anthropogenic activities, or may be a part of nature's repetitive cycle. There is no denying in climate change, but still, I do not believe that it's nowhere close to something that has to be referred to a catastrophe.
Thank you so much. Yeah, when we finally get down to defining key terms, you can begin going up there, we discover that a catastrophe may not be exactly what fits the bill when we start being more precise about our definitions. I next need to hear from Lane. Can you come forward? Perfect.
Upon entering this class, I had very little knowledge about climate change. It was very abstract, and in fact, I feel like I was skewed more towards climate change isn't as catastrophic as everyone is making it seem. So I got to be a part of the value team, and I got to debate that that environmental concerns are more important than economic growth. And after taking this class, I feel like my views on global warming have definitely been strengthened. I feel like I have a better understanding of what's currently going on, and I know what I can do as an individual to take steps to become more green. So my reflections on the debate that I've made was that after we watched The Inconvenient Truth, I saw Al Gore make the claim that which is more important, the economy, which he resembled by golden bars, or the environment in which he represented by Earth. I felt very repelled by this argument, and I felt that was very unfair that he would do such comparison. So when I got the topics, I immediately signed up to debate against that topic. And in part, I wanted to do that for 2 reasons, because I wanted to challenge his argument, and second, I wanted to educate myself on why I believe that opinion is true, in which I believe I have accomplished both. As for my beliefs toward the resolution of the debate, My beliefs are still the same before and after, and that I believe economic growth is very important to mitigate environmental concerns. Because how can we choose to prioritize the environment when a strong economy is required to be able to do so? And second, how can we choose to say that the environment is more important because it threatens future human life when there are current human lives that are threatened in the present because of lack of economic growth? But in the end, my biggest takeaway point is that it's really more of a collaborative effort between economic and environment to eventually come to this resolution of protecting our planet and our economy at the and live in a world that we can all enjoy. As for my values now, I feel like there's no definite answer to what my values are because it's really hard. As we can all see, global warming is not an easy issue, and at the same time, the solutions aren't easy as well. But if anything, my values now are understanding the importance of listening to the opposition point of view to understand the problem as a whole. How is this topic relevant to the real world? I feel like we all learned such great lessons from this class that we can all take away and apply to our daily lives. But one thing is to get a stronger understanding of global warming and its implications to our world today, regardless of the point itself. And after listening to all the debates, I feel like it's very important to know that it's not a simple issue, and global warming is it's a very complex issue that we need to all take understanding of. And even though and we need to come up with creative solutions on ourselves to do change. And even though we're only one person, but as Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world. And I feel like this is something we all learn in this class. Thank you.
Thank you, Lean. I appreciate you following the prompt and talking about your own values. Now we'll hear from Malik.
Hi, am I good?
No, you're not.
Okay.
That way? Back? That way? This way? This way? Now back. Perfect.
Hi everyone, my name is Malik.
Hi, Malik.
And like I said earlier, I always held a very strong belief that global warming is real, it's dangerous, it's catastrophic, it's something that we must address as soon as possible, and we have to find ways we have to find solutions to these cheap energy sources that we are constantly using. So throughout my life as a student, I have always valued the environment protection over the economy. I've always valued that people should exchange cars for bicycles and so on, because that was the only argument I was ever exposed to. I only saw it as it's either the environment or the economy. I never saw it that if you choose the environment, then that can damage a lot of developing countries, that can impede their growth. A lot of developing countries depend on these cheap energy sources as a way of developing and as a way of growing and feeding their populations. So that was an aspect that was introduced to me in this statement. So what I argued against the statement that global warming on balance is catastrophic. Again, coming into this debate, I thought for sure we would lose. I was like, there's no way. I mean, again, looking at the survey of the class, I thought everybody voted that, yes, global warming on balance is catastrophic. But then after conducting research, I found that global warming on balance is not catastrophic. In fact, using words that say that it is catastrophic make it worse for global warming because people will not address it. And the fact that these climate models are very uncertain. Although that did not change my values overall because I still believe in it, I'm more aware of the wording around global warming and how it's addressed across different media platforms and in universities and among people, because certain words are very important to how we address global warming, and that led me to question the statements that were presented to me afterwards about global warming is extreme, this is going to lead to this, and I'm like, no, it can't lead to that. And I wish that I concentrated in my debate a lot more about developing nations rather than scientific models. I mentioned it, but I did not focus on it as much as I would have liked to. Overall, my values did not change, but I am more aware of the wording surrounding global warming, and I'm questioning these statements more often than I was before.
Thank you, Malik. We'll now hear from Natalie, and then Sydney, then Yan, and then clean up by Pratik. Oh, yeah, over, forward. Oh! Good, very good, yeah.
Hi, I'm Natalie.
Hi, Natalie.
So, American philosopher Andrew Bernstein once said that a hero is the man who lets no obstacle prevent him from pursuing his values. This is the job of the debater, to pursue their values. So after performing a debate on environmental concerns outweighing economic growth, I've discovered not only more about climate change, but how to effectively argue my case. In doing extensive research, I've realized that yes, economic growth is not as important as environmental concerns, but the two can work hand in hand, as environmental concerns may go unaided if not helped by economic growth. So this should be important to everyone here, because learning how to effectively argue your case is a way to gain adherence from the audience, which is the ultimate goal of debating. So in reflecting upon my case, I realized that I have strengths in performance as well as research, but I could definitely work on my reputations and rebuttals. And looking at my beliefs, I've always thought that environmental concerns outweigh economic growth, but I think by listening to the feedbacks of the students in the class, as well as watching the video after the debate, I've really discovered that these two things are not mutually exclusive. They can work hand in hand. And so I don't think I got this from the opposition's argument, just because I felt like their argument wasn't as credible due to the sources they used, and like CNN, Business Insider, that had clickbait tactics, as well as the fact that they were sometimes outdated. But that will bring me to the next topic, which is values. In my value hierarchy, I value good reasons, I next value credibility, and then I value performance. Good reasons should be strong, but they should also be realistic. I think this is part of the reason that we lost. Our values weren't really realistic. These two things need to work together. As for credibility, you should look in the deep internet, you should go to the UCLA Library catalog, and you should look at peer-reviewed scientific articles that are no more than 3 years old. Me and my partner did this for all of our debate. It was a lot of work, but it really paid off in the end. Thirdly, performance. Performance is so important because it indirectly shows the credibility of the speaker. It can tell if they're passionate about what they're talking about, if they know what they're talking about, and just in general, if they care about what they're talking about. So I think that overall, in summary, I've learned more about my values as a speaker, but I've also learned more about how to just effectively argue, as I had never done a debate before this, so this is a really new experience for me. And to go back to my thesis, what I was saying before, I agree with the opposition now that environmental concerns need the help of economic growth in order to move forward and have scientific research. So in all, the thing that I can take away from this class, that debate is not about just arguing your own topic and pushing forth your own beliefs. It's more about allowing the audience to be this hero and discovering their values for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me say something before you sit down. Natalie's speech that you just saw was a model speech, okay? Beautifully done without notes. She followed the 7-part outline, and she followed the prompts. And in the main body, she addressed the issue of values, which she was supposed to do in the prompt. And I just want to say it's been a joy having you in this class and the other class. You're a very a model student, Natalie. So thank you for doing it right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Forward, 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 forward. Woo, back. Right there. Okay.
Hi, I'm Elsie.
Hi, Elsie.
So before preparing for the debate, I saw many videos and articles about how catastrophic the climate is, and I don't believe that climate change would be severe. I also don't have much knowledge on climate change, and I personally don't care about global warming. At this time, I don't think the climate change can affect our lives and our next generations. But after the debate, I realized how severe and how harmful the global warming is. Global warming is happening, and that human activity causes it. It is crucial that humans need to take action and prevent or stop global warming. In my debate, I argued that global warming causes higher temperature, which increase the risk of storms, droughts, and floods, the upset and delicate balance of ecosystems, and affect plants, animals, and changing landscapes and wildlife habitat. If I debated a fact resolution, there are some facts I deem as true and false. For example, I argue that human activity is responsible for global warming because we are the one who burn fossil fuels and clear trees that absorb carbon dioxide, sending heating, trapping gases into the atmosphere, and the carbon dioxide is the climate worst enemy. It's released when oil, coal, and other fossil fuels are burned for energy. The energy we use to power our homes, cars, and smartphones. If I debated a policy resolution, I agreed that the United States federal government should ban all fracking in the United States. The federal government should step in and regulate the practice more forcefully because fracking can have big environmental impacts that cannot be managed effectively by individual states alone. I still remember last year during fourth quarter, my professor canceled the class due to the Skirball fire near Getty. And we need to wear the mask to school in order to prevent inhale bad quality air. Wildfires are an increasingly costly phenomenon in California and the western United States. After the debate, I found out that there are still so many people don't believe in climate change. Many of us just jump into debate mode and when discussing climate change. We feel like we need to present all our best evidence for our argument. Instead, I think we should look at more like we're sharing a story about our lives. For example, tell your friends about how you saw on Facebook that your friend's parents lost their house because the California wildfires, and that you're concerned about how often wildfires are occurring in the U.S.
Thank you, Elsie. Okay, and then to sum up the whole experience, last but not least, our illustrious master debater.
Sure. So values in and of itself are something that are personal and cannot be really easily defined. And since we are not part of Dot Hall, I'm not going to go on and rather define what values should be or like give a philosophical statement about what they are. So instead, what I would like to do is probably just share my experience and what it was like for me to go within this value debate. Coming into this value debate specifically about the politicization of science and whether or not it's undesirable, to be really honest, just going within this debate, I had no idea what politicization of science really was. Having had debate experience, I've never debated that topic because climate change was something that was not easily and readily discussed within the circuit. So that was the first challenge that I really had to administer and really look at what the topic really was. So the first thing that I did was just looking at the face value. I realized that politicization means putting something on the political spectrum. And given my personal belief that debating and like challenging status quo and like really arguing about something is important, in terms of my own value perspective, I thought that politicization was something positive and that's something beneficial. But having done the research and after having done the debate, I realized that while debating and while arguing on a political spectrum is sometimes beneficial, at the end of the day, I came to adhere with the affirmative side and rather change my own value scheme or value pyramid at that point. Because while debate is important, the harms that politicization brings in terms of creating gridlocks at the political spectrum, as the affirmative stated, and the fact that Sydney even brought out the example of the Koch brothers and them influencing policy was something that I really had to take into account. And as a result, I adhered with the affirmative at that point. So insofar as my values go, I still do value debate, but at the same time, I do value what the overall society does, which is how is it on net benefits important for the society to ensure that it's not politicized so that they can actually do something about it and move forward with that policy. So that was, in a way, my overall experience within the value round, because having said that and having done this value speech, within the overall debate, I just don't like value debates overall, but this was something that was enriching for me because not only did it allow me to reflect on my own values, but at the same time adhere with the affirmative. Having said that for myself, for my group, I do believe that I think although I did not help them much, they were able to come out with it with largely good understanding of what the values were. They were at the end of the day not only able to question their values, but at the same time put to test how they can challenge others' values and debate on the different debate topics that were there. So overall, not only did this sort of value debate help me ameliorate my experience, but at the same time, for the overall group, it helped them understand what their values were, how they can look at different values with a different perspective, challenge those values at the end of the day, and come out thinking differently, or even if they had the same conceptions as before, still hold on to them very firmly.
Good, thank you, Pratik. Let me just add a couple of sentences to what Pratik had to say while the policy group is lining up, and that would be Arun, Chiara, Frank, Haley, Ketchy, Jacob, Justin, Nilu, C. Rosh, Trish, Tyler, and Yasin. What? Oh, we're running short of time. I know, we gotta roll. Okay, let me just say quickly, the reason people hate to debate about values is they're really core and solid and they're hard to change in people. And number two, they're very sticky and very tough. And they require a lot of introspection. They also require you to, on a societal level, talk about value hierarchies. But that doesn't mean it's not important to think about what you value and what you value most in certain contexts, such as environmental versus economic growth, etc. Okay, begin. So, keep an eye on the door for the evil-eyed professor.
Are we doing first people, or just the order you set? Should we just do the
You just go. You're going. You're right there. Just go.
It was May 2015. My hands were quivering. I was intimidated. I was scared. It was the first time I ever competed on the debate national circuit in high school. It was the first time I ever traveled across the country and competed at a tournament at the caliber of the Tournament of Champions. And ironically enough, the first policy round, or the first topic round, was the United States federal government should implement a carbon tax of 10%, ironically perfectly fitting the case that I had to debate. But that, Arun, being validated by a decent rank in that round out of 18, it was a different form of debate, it was a free-for-all. Out of 18 people, I got around rank 3 or 4. And that sort of validated me. I thought I was a shit. Oh, I got ranked 3 or 4. I went against the best debaters in the nation, and this sort of validated me. But up until this class and taking this class this quarter, I realized that Arun, or Varun, you don't know jack shit. You absolutely don't know anything about climate change or global warming. But after participating in 2 debates, and specifically this policy debate, I not only learned about some key insights about policy and about climate change, but I also changed my mind on 2 particular key things. And then I'll lastly conclude with an analysis of the mandates and my means that my partner and I, Justin, created. But before I go into that, why do I deserve your ears for the next 2 minutes? And it's very, very critical. It's because whether we're young, whether we're our age, whether we're old, all carbon emissions affect all of us. They all have negative externalities, whether it be poor air quality rising our health premiums, or whether it be poor air quality affecting our taxes because we have to pay more to the government in order for them to clean it up. there's a plethora of negative externalities that carbon emissions impacts our daily lives. So we have to be cognizant and relevant of that, and we have to be cognizant of the policy to correct that. Now let me go into my first and primary takeaway from this debate. And because this is a policy round, I came away from the main takeaway that policy and climate and technology are inseparable. You can't have anything without the other. They are a necessity of each other. In order for technology to develop in a successful or productive, or science to develop in a successful or productive way, there has to be public policy correctives. Now let's say even if there is just natural processes that aren't man-made, still there has to be public policy correctives in order to change that. Now let's go on to my perceptions of how they changed before and after the debate. Now before the debate, I was pretty much on the favor of the proposition because I did many debates about curbing emissions, and generally I tend to be more on the Democratic side when it comes to climate change, so I was on the favor of that. So I came in with preconceived biases. But afterwards, I came out with two realizations which kind of changed my mind. Number one, there's way more pseudoscience and climate alarmists on the left than I originally thought. And on the other side, there are a lot more climate deniers than I originally thought. So in the end of the day, what we need to understand in a policy round is that policy and climate science are inseparable. And in order for one to progress, the other also needs to progress and also needs to advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Varun. Back, 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 back. One step. Right. Perfect.
Hi everyone, I'm Kiara.
Hi, Kiara.
So when I was a freshman, the first class I enrolled in here at UCLA was in a year-long GE cluster called Food and Sustainability, and basically what this was a year-long class on the environment, on food production, ecosystems, and most importantly, most from what I remember, the evils of global climate change. So as you can imagine, after a full year of hearing about that, I really just absorbed all the beliefs that were thrown at me. I was a firm climate change believer, and I had really no reason to question that because my authorities had told me that that was just the way I should be. So fast forward to this quarter, being in this class, we are expected to challenge everything around us and all the claims around us. So when I found out we would be debating climate change, my first thought was, what is there to debate? My professors had told me that it was indisputably real, and so therefore, what was there to debate? Looking back on that thought now, I couldn't begin to predict how wrong that statement would be, how much my perspective would change, and also how much this class would challenge my existing beliefs. So when I was tasked to debate whether the United States should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions, regardless of whether China, India, and other countries do so, I chose to side with the affirmative because that's just where my personal beliefs stood before the class. After doing the debate, I still side with that, but the reason why I side with the affirmative is very different now than it was then. Because prior to doing this debate, I did not know, I was not well informed, I had not done any research, I just really didn't know anything about the topic, and so when I claimed to be for the affirmative before this debate, it seemed that my reason for that was because it was kind of like the right thing to say after being in a class, like the good and the right thing to say, yes, we should definitely reduce emissions. But basically, looking back on that now, that affirmative stance really just came from habit, from hearing what my authorities were telling me and not doing any critical analysis or reasoning of my own. So when I researched the implementation of a carbon tax, which is what my partner and I suggested for our policy, I was really interested in seeing how people from all across the spectrum were nitpicking at the carbon tax, and it inspired me to apply that sort of skepticism to my life from not just global climate change issues, but just everything in general from now on. I still kind of do support the carbon tax. I think it should be looked at skeptically, but I think the benefits of implementing one could be a really good option for reducing carbon emissions. So overall, what this debate has shown me and this class is that I need to challenge the validity of the statements and claims being made by my authorities and just around anywhere, just whatever I hear from the rest of my life. Because when I was in that GE class, I just kind of accepted everything for what was being said, and I was not being skeptical, and it did not, I was not able to explain why I believed what I did.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kiara. Yeah, that's called indoctrination. All right, next.
I think class time is over, Professor, but I'll go if you want.
Yeah, well, we'll just keep going. If you have to leave, just turn in your paper, but I'm going to hear everybody. There's no one else coming in, so if you can stay, stay. If you have to go, go. Thank you. You have to go, right?
If we have to go, how will we make it up?
I'll just average it. You don't want to, you have to go, right? You have a class? Okay. Go, Frank. Go, Frank. Don't leave. Either you're gonna deliver it or give me a paper. Go.
So, originally, I came
Step
in.
forward. Back. Step back. Step back. There you go.
Okay. So, originally, I came in wanting to be a part of the fact.
We have 2 minutes. Shh. Right, yeah.
Well, I wanted to be a part of the fact group because I feel like environmental science is kind of a crock of shit. So I wanted to see why environmental science was so bad. So I wanted to be on the fact side. I really don't like policy. Policy is not my thing. So when I debated fracking, and in the end, I really think that we should have more policies in place when it comes to fracking. I don't think it makes sense to have the companies that frack not disclose the chemicals they use. I think that doesn't make any sense. I think we should also distance ourselves from the wells when we're talking about local domestic water wells. Some of the mistakes I think I made in my debate, I think I went about it wrong. I think I should align myself with the values of my audience a little bit more. I think when I began, I was thinking more about what I valued, and that was something that I thought more about the logic of the statement. I thought that if I found one thing that would ultimately discredit them, it would be why we cannot go to 0% fracking, why we can't have any fracking. And that would mean the impact of the chemical nature of it, not the electrical nature. But this wasn't something really that the audience granted adherence to, and I'm not sure. I think for 2 reasons. One of the reasons was because I wasn't clear in explaining, because I was just looking at my paper the whole time, and I was trying to get everything in 7 minutes, and that's why I was doing so. So I think I should have rethought my process and tried to make it a little bit shorter in order to tell a better story. And the other thing was the values that were held by the audience. I don't think they really, I think I tried to teach about something, also convince them that it was worthy, so I was trying to do too much, and this is my first debate. I shouldn't have expected so much.
1 minute.
So in hindsight, I really learned that when you're talking to someone, I think Mr. Koch said it pretty well. He said, when you're talking to someone, you have to think about what the values are of that sphere you're speaking in. And I think you should ground yourself in that first. If you want to be, if you want to like win the debate. If you don't, I went into this not even wanting to win the debate. I wanted to really learn for myself because I had no idea what fracking was about. So I accomplished that, and I expressed what I valued in it, which didn't resemble exactly what the audience valued as well. So I'm fine in what I learned, but I think I debated improperly, and that's the best takeaway from this. So the main takeaway is that I just learned how to debate properly because I never had experience in debating before. So yeah.
Yeah, Frank, thank you so much for mentioning that there's 2 parts. It's not just putting together an assertion, logic, and standing up and delivering it, but it's also considering the audience. Frank, I would also mention, please don't keep your hands in your pocket the whole time you're speaking. It hurts your credibility. Oh, you're perfect, but you have to wear those sunglasses on your head. Can you lose them?
Is that your timing, right?
Okay, nice. Okay, step back. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Begin.
Alright, so just like a lot of people, I came in.
Thank you, Frank.
I came in with the notion that climate change is a no-brainer. And I didn't even listen to the opposition side. And what surprised me was that I learned that I didn't even listen to my side's arguments. I just believed it. I didn't even know why I believed it in the first place. So During the signups, I was quick to go on to the affirmative side of fracking because I had some knowledge on it based on my geography class. That was just like one class. But beginning to research it, I realized that it could theoretically be safe. So I started doubting my stance and my decision. And throughout my research process, I kept going back and forth on fracking, on whether I do believe that that fracking is a bad idea overall. And throughout this research process, I learned about the loopholes of it and how much loopholes there are in policy. And it's not just about electricity, like Frank said. It's about the chemical composition of it. It's also about the industrial sector, not just the electricity. But at the end of the day, I still genuinely believe that the way to go is renewable energy. And I am a bit cynical about regulations because I know in the past it has not been working, and I really don't think that both can flourish. I don't think that you can be regulating something effectively and at the same time pushing us forward for renewable energy. I just don't think both can happen at the same time. The tendency is that we will rely on natural gas because it's the short-term economic benefits, and that's just the reality of it, I think. So in a perfect world, I think the best idea is to ban fracking gradually, maybe through a span of 10 years and tie in the regulations, or 15 years. I have 15 years, let's say, but that's in a perfect world. It's probably not going to happen as much as I wanted to, and I think that's kind of my weakness, is I kind of treated it like a value debate. That's what I believed in, and policy is kind of my weakness. So overall, I just learned to be more critical. I learned why I believe in what I believe and why I should be more critical of other arguments.
Thank you, Trish. Very nice.
Do you want to move this to the Comm department?
Is our class trying to come in here?
The class is here. The
There's
TA
a
is
class-
not here yet.
Oh.
But the class is here.
Because I have an exam.
The class is here.
I also need to go, so if we can make it quick.
Yeah, there's a class here, but the TA's not here.
They're not here yet. Yeah, they're not here yet, but if the TA start.
Just start, go, yeah, okay, get everything outside, put everything outside. And then I'll just carry this out here too, please. I'll just carry these
Or
last.
do you want to do this? I could go record you scene in the Comm thing if you want, so then you can
Go,
review it.
go ask Sophie if we can have the small conference room here.
We can just make it happen here really quick.
Because they're not here yet, so we could just.
Okay, we'll
No, I know,
try,
if
but
they start,
they're
like,
gonna
you're gonna
start,
get interrupted.
they're gonna start it for, the guy's gonna give me the stink eye.
Hit the play button, Professor.
The
Come
play
on, let's
bu-
go,
the
let's
play
do this.
button's on, play button's on, baby. Okay, so one step forward, please. Yeah. Okay. One step back, right there. Right there, yeah. Okay, begin, man.
Alright, so prior to taking this class, I was a global warming skeptic. Contrary to like what most of the class said, I wasn't so sure if global warming was true because I just felt like it was so politicized, and I thought that people were dramatizing it a lot and like making it seem like, oh no, it's gonna be the end of the world if this happens. So I did come in being a bit skeptical and just feeling like it was dramatized a lot. And I also did feel like it was it was distracting people from real issues like poverty or human oppression. But I still had environmental concerns. I did care to like save the planet. Pollution is an issue, but not necessarily the global warming claim. So, before the debate, when I knew that fracking was bad, because I heard it was.
Is that yours?
Fracking was bad and it needed to be stopped to save the earth. My opinion was based off of passive exposure on the topic and limited information. I never researched the topic myself. It was just something I heard that fracking was really bad, and so I believed it. And when reading the resolution, I thought, yes, fracking is bad, but it seemed really extreme to ban all fracking. So that was my main issue with the resolution, just all fracking. It just seemed so extreme. So, and I didn't think it was a realistic resolution because of how wealthy the industry is. I knew that companies were backing up a lot of politicians, and I knew that the government had an interest in profiting off of this rich resource. So, and my mistake was sort of in focusing on the unrealisticness of it instead of the fact that we're arguing whether it should happen or not. So that was somewhere I struggled in. Now that I learned more about fracking, I have a lot more information about the harms of fracking to human health and the environment, and I definitely do believe that there needs to be a change. However, I think the United States should not ban all fracking, but rather limit it and place strict regulations on the industry.
We gotta stop. Thank you. We're gonna continue down the hall.
Okay.
Or you just like walk
Get
in.
that elevator.
Get it?
Sorry, folks.
Wait, Professor, we're gonna need your stuff.
Yeah, just bring it.
Okay. Oh, you still have a professor, he's a TA.
Yeah, I'm glad it was a TA because that professor is just furious at me.
Yeah, the TA looked okay, but he just like kept poking his head.
He's a timid
Should we
TA.
continue in here?
Yeah.
So in conclusion, why don't you give me your conclusion?
Are you serious right now?
Yeah, it's still recording.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where the conference room is. Did you ask Sylvia?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well,
But I thought we were gonna finish in that room.
what room?
The classroom.
The Comm Studies conference room. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well.
I thought it was the conference rooms downstairs on the first floor.
No, right here.
Here, do you want to go in and I'll just go ask her? Or actually, it'd be better.
Yeah. Hello. Can I get the key to the small conference room, please? Thank you. How are you doing?
Small conference room.
Can I have another one of these?
That's what they're there for. I will give this to you.
I'll
only
walk
if
it
you
right back.
Bring it right back. They're here for you.
Thank you.
We got it?
Yeah.
Oh, this is where they had the.
This needs.
Oh yeah, I saw it in the.
This needs to be.
From.
Could you walk this back to the lady in that room I just came out of?
Here, I got it. So, finish your speech.
Okay.
I got this.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Boy, this iPad is just a workhorse. It's wonderful. Yes. Mhm. Okay, good. Move those chairs away, madam. Please. Yes. Oh, good. And move over that way a little bit. Oh, isn't that just perfect? I need to say something to you, so don't leave without me talking to you, okay?
Okay.
Can you open that door, please? Yeah. Just unlock the little handle. Thank you, Neely. You're a trooper. Is there anybody else out there? No? Is there?
So.
Yeah.
Oh, can I see?
Yeah.
All right. So just continuing where I left off, in terms of what policy I think should now be put in place, I do think there should be really strict regulation in regards to where fracking should be allowed, the location, the chemicals used, and also I did think Haley's idea of placing a tax on fracking was actually a good idea. So in terms of location, I thought it would be beneficial because to distance it away from the communities that are being harmed from it, and just to quickly wrap up because I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
Overall, from this debate, I did learn. It was a really good learning experience. I spent a lot of time researching facts and just finding credible sources to show why fracking is bad, and I should have focused more on developing a really strong policy instead because because the opposition just acknowledged that what we were saying is true, so
True,
it just
yeah.
weakened it.
Right.
And so I just thought that.
Yeah.
And then
Can you give me my?
another thing
my-
I noticed
my
is
bracket.
that we were trying to back up our points by repeating our case, and it put us on the defense. And instead, I think we should have been a bit more aggressive towards the opposition and like attacking them respectfully, of course. But just us repeating our points of that fracking is bad just put us on the defense. So I thought that also harmed us a bit.
Mhm.
But overall, this was a really good learning experience. I never debated before, and I just saw how different it is to be up there speaking and in the moment, and everything is going by so quickly as opposed to being an audience member. And it was a really great learning experience. I'm happy to have been in this class.
Thank you so much. And sorry for the interruptions, and thank you so much for being flexible.
My
I want to just say that I agree with what you said about you learning about having the wrong focus.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you learned that, yeah. So Sylvia just gave me a Sour Patch. You want some? Anybody want a Sour Patch?
I don't eat sugar.
Yeah, I don't
You don't
either.
eat sugar? I'm on a diet. Good
I
for you.
tried that, it's so hard.
Or just natural. Like
Okay, you're let's see, you stay right there, just move a little bit that way, sir, and let me see if I can make this happen without making this damn iPad stop. Okay, Neela,
Yeah.
if you could do something simultaneous for your multicast.
Yes.
If you could turn on the back of both of those computers, just turn them on, thank you. It's on the back of one of the sets. Okay, I believe I have Yasin.
You do.
Am I saying it right?
Yeah, it's like have you seen
I know,
Yasin?
I know, I apologize. I know I've screwed it up on
Oh,
quarter
no
from
offense
from
taken at all.
Yasin to Yasin
Yeah,
to
that's-
Yusin. What?
They don't turn on.
Well, look on the ground. Maybe it's the power cord. Okay. All right, Yasin.
All right.
Begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Yasin.
Hi, Yasin.
So I want to start off this speech by saying that I grew up in Berkeley, California, and for a place that prides itself so much on being liberal and being progressive, it actually can end up being a place that's extremely closed-minded and not open to seeing other points of view that are not aligned with theirs. So growing up in Berkeley, like climate change being a fact was like the dogma, it was the truth, and if you disagreed with it, you were kind of exiled, like as if you had leprosy or something. They were not very much open to debating the validity of the science on the other end. So when I came to college, I remember 3 years ago, my freshman year, I was having dinner with a friend at the dining hall, along with another friend from Berkeley, and the friend who was not from Berkeley, I don't remember how the conversation got to this, but he said, "Oh, I think global warming is a hoax. Like I don't think it's true."
2 minutes.
And we flamed him. My God, did we flame him? And we didn't even really have any scientific evidence to flame him with. We just, we hit him with the, "Oh my God, how could you not believe in climate change?"
Shamed him, yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't, along the lines of like, "Oh my God, you don't believe in gravity?" Like, it's such a fact, even though we didn't have any hard evidence to back it up. And that mindset I've honestly held until I took this class. And this class actually did a lot to open me up, open my eyes to see the nuances in the story. So yeah, like I said before this class, I believe that climate change was as close to an objective fact as there was. But after taking this class, I've learned that it's a lot more nuanced than I previously thought. For example, how can we say that there's scientific consensus on the topic when there are so many well-credentialed scientists who are being oppressed and muted by the overall scientific community, like we saw in the BBC film, The Great Global Warming Swindle. And also, my trust in the climate models that we're basing all of our estimates off of was very, very much challenged in this course, and there was a great debate about it, and I'm very thankful for it, because it challenged my point of view and also gave me a lot of good information, and Haley specifically got me back to believing that yes, they're not perfect, but they're the best things we've got, especially the ones that, I don't remember their names, but the ones that she mentioned. And to wrap this up, my updated position on climate change is that it is very much real. I'm not exactly sure what percentage of it is anthropomorphic or caused by mankind, but I do believe that every developed country should put a plan in motion to drastically reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, though I'm not sure what to do about developing countries because it wasn't their fault that this problem arose in the first place. So how can we tell them to reduce their emissions when they haven't even gotten a chance to catch up with everybody else?
Great, well, yeah, it's pretty mean to do that.
Yeah.
Especially when they don't even have electricity. Thank you, Yassine. I just want to make a couple of comments for the record, for the tape. Talk with you real quick and then you want to get downstairs and upload this.
Yes. I need the iPad for that.
Yeah, I want to say, just in terms of, I liked everything you said. I think when you watch yourself right on YouTube, you'll see that you spent really an inordinate amount of time on your introduction about Berkeley. When I wish you would have just said, I came from Berkeley, where global warming is the truth. And that's all you needed to say. And
I kind of lose track of time when I'm up there.
And if you had followed if you watch Natalie's speech where she gave a preview, a significant statement, and then followed the prompt a little better where she talked about policy as at the same time she integrated her belief changes and sameness, then you would have done it perfectly. But I do appreciate the insights you came up with, and you're right. These people that talk about there's a consensus and the debate is over. As a very cute girl that came to my debate team as a freshman said one day, Professor Miller, they're way wrong. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I end it?
Yeah, you can have this. And